Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to some Total War Warhammer 2 news. We've had the LIZARDMEN roster revealed. We know what's going to be in the starting LIZARDMEN roster. We got a sneak peek at a new mechanic that will be applicable to the LIZARDMEN, and some pretty heavy-handed hints that what the DLC LIZARDMEN pack will be. Not a bit of a spoiler there, but it's very much what we all predicted it looks like. But let's go down the roster and see what we got, shall we? So, as I mentioned in my news update yesterday, we have had the generals. They're the Slann, Mage, Priest, the Saurus Oldblood. They will be our generals. The Slann will have a new mechanic in terms of how he uses magic. So, the way that, as powerful as the magic users are, they are apparently making allowances for that. So, there will be new mechanics introduced in the way that Slann use magic. Now, what they are, we don't know. We have been told there will be another stream or discussion or posting about magic and the LIZARDMEN later on by Joey and the crew, but we will have to wait to see what CA says about that. But there are new mechanics which are kind of to be expected if the Slann are going to be as powerful as they are meant to be. So that's a good thing to see. The Saurus Oldblood, we know they'll also have Carnosaur mounts. These will be your generic sort of melee focused general. Heroes, we have the Skink Priest, which will be your magic user who isn't a general. We have the Skink Chief, which is confirmed, which some people thought might not be included, but is, and I imagine the Skink Chief will act very much as your assassin class hero, very much like the Witch Hunters for the Empire. And we have the Saurus Veteran, the melee-focused hero, the Empire Captain. He'll reduce recruitment costs, a lot of the same stuff we've seen in Total War Warhammer before. Now, in terms of the infantry, we have the Skink Cohort. Now, the Skink Cohort will be armed with shields and hand weapons, and they can be upgraded to have javelins. So that's the way it'll go out. The basic unit will have a shield and a hand weapon, and then they'll be upgraded to have javelins as well. And once they have the javelins, those will be given poison damage. And sorry guys, just because I haven't mentioned it yet, but if you'd like a full rundown of the kind of tabletop versions of these, do check my original LIZARDMEN army list in the top right hand corner now to give you a full rundown, a bit more detail and history on all these units. In this video, I'm really just going to run over what they said in the video about each unit and what that might teach us about what's coming up in Total War Warhammer 2. So the Skinks have javelins as an upgrade to the Skink Cohort. Said they'd have very good leadership. They'll be able to hold the line. Now, a very interesting element that was mentioned about the Skinks is that all LIZARDMEN units will appear to have, or at least most of them, will appear to have a mechanic that they refer to as Rampage, whereby if their health drops below a certain level, the unit itself will go off on a rampage and be uncontrollable by the player. That is, unless there are some, they've mentioned there'll probably be some general bonuses to this in terms of your general will get buffs and debuffs to this ability to stop it happening. But they also mentioned if you have Skinks, particularly Skinks looking after monsters. Now, I'm not sure if that's you have to get a separate unit where Skinks mind monsters, or you just have to have Skinks nearby to enforce that rule. I'm not sure which one that is, but they've said that if you have Skinks involved in the monsters, they are less likely to go on a rampage and you're less likely to lose control over them. So the Skinks don't rampage themselves, I don't believe. They have very high leadership, and that's the way the Skinks operate. Now, it's very unusual for a light infantry unit to have high leadership, so that might be an interesting mechanic in Total War Warhammer 2. As well as this, we get the Skirmishing Skinks with the blowpipes. That's been counted. As I said, the Javelin types will be upgraded version of the cohorts. They'll be one and the same. And then the blowpipes will just be the only skirmishing kind, just pure skirmishing Skinks we get. And we also have something I was doubtful of, but we got it. The Chameleon Skinks. They're going to make an appearance in the game. They do all kinds of poison damage. They didn't go into too many details about what they have, but I imagine they'd have to have Snipe. They'd have to have Stalk in terms of Total War Warhammer traits. But they are in the game, confirmed on the list. Woohoo, Chameleon Skinks. Pretty cool. And next up, we have the Saurus Warriors. Now, the Saurus Warriors particularly will suffer from that rampage mechanic I mentioned earlier. When they drop below a certain level of health, although it has been said they'll have huge amounts of health, so the Lizardmen armies will be very, very tanky. So they'll have a lot of health, but when they run at below a certain level of health, one presumes, they run the risk of going into a rampage and you losing control of them as the general, and them just charging at the nearest unit, the nearest enemy unit to them. Now, there are 4 varieties of Saurus Warriors in the game: Spear, Hand Warrior, which is just a hand weapon, and shielded and non-shielded varieties of both of them. So you'll have Spear, no shield, Spear shield, Warrior no shield, Warrior shield. Those are the main bog standard variety of Saurus Warriors we'll get in Total War Warhammer 2. Now, another thing he mentioned about the Saurus is that because they are quite low to the ground, they're bulky, they have a good center of gravity, is that he said, to quote the chap, they'll do very well against cavalry charges. Now, I assume that just means they'll get a charge defense against large, but he didn't come straight out and say it like that. I'm just taking it to mean that. So Saurus Warriors, possibly all of them, charge defense against large, which is, again, super, super helpful and makes them a very interesting unit indeed. So that is the Saurus Warriors. They've also said they'd have kind of medium armor. I'm not sure what that means in terms of values. We didn't get any values in this or gameplay, as I said before. But that is the Saurus Warriors. We do have the Temple Guard. Now, the Temple Guard, being more disciplined, will not suffer from the rampage mechanic that the other Saurus Warriors suffer from. But that's about all the extra detail we got about the Temple Guard. One imagines they'll have higher armor, there'll be a halberd unit, so there will be anti-large, one has to imagine, and they'll have that higher thing, and maybe with that charge defense as well. So that is the Temple Guard as they were described in the stream today. And we do have Kroxigors, guys. Woohoo! Kroxigors. But I imagine Kroxigors in particular might suffer from this rampage mechanic that has been discussed. Hopefully, if you get skinks nearby, they'll reduce that. And that very much plays into the lore, as I discussed in my Lizardmen army video originally, of the idea of the relationship between those two species of Lizardmen is a very close one. So I like that might play a part in Total War Warhammer 2 as well. So they have brought that relationship from the tabletop into Total War. Now we'll look at the cavalry. Now this is where things go a bit creative, one could argue. So we have Cold One Riders. Now there are several different varieties of Cold One Riders. There's feral Cold Ones. Now get used to the idea of the feral kind of dinosaur-like creatures in the Lizardmen army, because feral just means with no riders on them, and almost every dinosaur, or anything we can equate to a dinosaur in our world, apart from the Lizardmen themselves, has a feral variety. So you have feral Cold Ones, and their argument behind the introduction of these units that haven't existed previously in Warhammer was they wanted to give you an option of having Cold Ones early on in the game, because otherwise they're in a very elite unit. So they wanted to give you the option of just so you get Cold Ones out there so they can look cool in battles. I suppose they're like the Squigs to the Squig Riders, that kind of thing. But they will be vicious, they will be quick, but you'll have the feral Cold Ones. You'll have the Cold One Riders, which I have to imagine the melee-focused cavalry of the Lizardmen, the Cold One Riders. And you have the Cold One Riders with spears, which one has to assume is going to be the more shock cavalry, much like Chaos Knights with lances, or Grail Guardians and Grail Knights, that kind of equivalent of you have the melee-focused one, and you have the one that does a particularly devastating charge. And one has to imagine the one with the devastating charge is the one with spears. But they also mentioned another unit that hadn't made it into the tabletop version of Warhammer, which is the Horned Ones, which is a special kind of rarely born breed of Cold One that's born with a horn on its front. And they have said, they describe them as being swifter and quicker and more wild. So one assumes they might rampage easier, but be a much faster version of a Cold One. So one that can actually maybe chase down Missile Cav in other armies. Because Cold Ones on the tabletop, if I remember correctly, are actually a little bit slower than Cav from both the Empire and Bretonnia. So it would be good to have a unit that can maybe just catch up with some Missile Cav if it is firing at you. So those are the main Cold Ones, and that's a lot of varieties of Cold Ones. So feral Cold Ones, Cold One Riders, Cold One Riders with spears, and Horned Ones. Says these guys will be particularly devastating damage dealers. I think he said they'd all have armor piercing as well. So the Cold Ones with armor piercing, damage dealing, could be particularly ferocious. Now moving on to the Terradons. Now we saw the Terradons in the trailer. The Terradons were confirmed as mounts for the Skink Chief and the Skink Priest. Now, Skink Priest would be particularly helpful, magic user, good to get them in the air, and the Skink Chief as well, that's a pretty good solution. So we have the Terradon Riders, we saw them in the trailer. There are several types, so there's Terradon Riders with javelins, and there is the bowler slug variety as pictured on the right hand side, which should do fire damage and will have a missile attack as well. And the javelin ones I imagine will do poison damage, so you'll have a bit of variety in terms of how they're used. They also confirmed that the rock is usable as a bomb, but it's only a one-use thing, so they don't go pick up other rocks. You get the one drop from a Terradon Rider in terms of the bomb, the big rock, and the gyrocopter-like bomb, and that's the only use you get in each battle. So that's fair enough, I think. So looking forward to having these as mounts for the Skink Chiefs. And moving on, we have the monsters or the larger creatures. And we have the Stegodon confirmed and the Ancient Stegodon confirmed as an upgrade, but there's only two things they have on their backs that they mentioned. Of course, there's the Feral Stegodon as well. Sorry, I forgot to mention that because it's it's a new unit. So there's the Feral Stegodon with nothing on its back. There's the Stegodon as pictured here with the giant crossbow, and he said that will have poison as well as the javelins with the skinks around it, so that'll be a cool little unit. And this is the other one with giant blowpipes, and we've actually seen them model this one in that EGX video from before that Creative Assembly put up. So we've seen them modeling this one, and it looks really cool, but that's the blowpipe version. So you have the giant crossbow version and the blowpipe version. What I imagine blowpipe version does better against infantry, whereas the giant crossbow probably better against the larger creatures of the Warhammer world. So nothing on their back, giant bow, blowpipe. And we have the Batiladon. Now, there will be the Feral Batiladon with nothing on its back, as we saw in the trailer, actually. And there'll be the Solar Engine Batiladon, which fires a massive beam of solar energy, which I pointed out in the trailer. I did call it the Engine of the Gods mistakenly, but I pointed out in the trailer we see one of them firing. Not quite as beam-like as I would have liked, more of a kind of a shot, but, you know, beggars can't be choosers, it still looks alright. So we get that one. But for the Batiladons, we also get a brand new type called the Revivification. I may be added an extra V in there if I didn't have to. Batiladon, which heals. Now, this isn't something that's historically been in the Lizardmen army, but considering the Slann Mage Priests can use the Law of Life, and if you combine that with a tanky Saurus army in the first place, which they spoke about in ways that, like, these guys have more health than any other infantry unit they've put in the game so far. That's kind of how it sounded when they described it. And healing Batiladon. And they have charge defense. And they're vicious dinosaurs. It looks slightly terrifying to face. If you throw all of that together, but it depends on how the magic mechanics work for the Slann, whether they will actually have access to the Law of Life or not. But so there's a new type of Batiladon they're introducing. Now, you guys may have noticed earlier in the video, there are some units in this army list from my army list Lizardmen video that are missing out, but we'll cover everything that's missing at the end of this video. And Carnosaurs, again, mounts for your Saurus Oldblood. I don't think you'll probably get them as a mount for your hero Saurus. I imagine that will probably just be a cold one, much like your heroes don't get access to dragons or stuff like that, or the higher end mounts in a lot of Total War Warhammer before. So I imagine that will be for the generals, and there is also a feral Carnosaur, which we did see in the trailer, which was a Carnosaur with no rider on its back, which isn't really according to lore, but they've thrown all of the dinosaurs in in this feral version, which is kind of recycling to a certain extent, but I can understand why they did it. But that is the Carnosaur. Now, let's have a look at what we're missing and what that might mean. So we're missing the Stegodon with the Engine of the Gods. That didn't show up in what they spoke about. They didn't describe it. Now, the Engine of the Gods is essentially a thing that buffs magic ability, has a very strong ward save, so it's particularly tough, and it has a bound spell on it as well. So it would be like the most upgraded mount for a Skink Mage, for a Skink Priest, sorry. And so that being missing is a bit strange, but you could almost throw that into something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But just bear in mind, the Engine of the Gods can be very much a mount for a Skink Priest in the future. We also don't have the Troglodon, which usually has a Skink Oracle on its back. No mention of that whatsoever. No mention of the LIZARDMEN, which is a missile unit for the Lizardmen. No mention of the Salamander. Now, the Salamander and the LIZARDMEN missing really limits the missile options of the Lizardmen. I mean, they still have the Skinks, I suppose, and they still have the Terradons and stuff, and the blowpipes, but with the Salamander and the LIZARDMEN, that really gives them some missile options, and I'm a bit upset that they're not in there, because it would offer you a lot of tactical variety, and put the Lizardmen up there with some of the more tactically flexible armies, rather than just making them another rush army with 1 or 2 siege weapons. They're a bit... You're in danger of making them a bit too like Chaos if these units aren't included. But there we go. So these are missing. Also, no Ripperdactyl, guys, I'm afraid to say. No Ripperdactyl mentioned. No Jungle Swarm. And no Batiladon with the Ark of Sotek on its back, spewing out an infinite number of snakes to attack the enemy with. So, a lot of these, particularly the last two, particularly the Jungle Swarm and the Batiladon with Ark of Sotek on the back being missing, all but, in my mind, confirms the DLC for the Lizardmen will be the Prophet of Sotek DLC, where we'll definitely get the Ark of Sotek, we'll probably get the Jungle Swarm. Now, looking back at the stuff that was missing, one could make an argument for all of it being included in that DLC as well. The Ripperdactyls, ridden by Skinks, and Sotek as the snake god is very much worshipped by Skinks, so very much tied into who the Skinks are. So Skinks ride Ripperdactyls, Skinks handle Salamanders, Skinks handle LIZARDMENs, Skinks only ride the Troglodon, and the Skinks use the Engine of the Gods as a mount. So there's still hope, fingers crossed, that with a Prophet of Sotek DLC, we get all of these added in under the theme of just improving the Skinks and making life better for the Skinks under the rulership of the Prophet of Sotek. But we'll have to wait and see. That's all a possibility, so I've not lost all hope yet, but that's what we've got so far. I'm super excited, guys. It's a shame we didn't see any in-game stuff, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. All of this stuff can still be added in the Prophet of Sotek update or DLC, so looking forward to that. Excited to see it. Excited to see the Lizardmen. Lore of Life, tanky, crazy dinosaurs, damage dealers, a hugely viable and very, very dangerous looking army, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. Yeah, sorry for no gameplay, but again, there wasn't any today. Hope you guys are excited as I am. At least we know what's in it now. We know what to expect. We can start to set about our tactical strategy. Anyway, guys, that's it from me. As always, huge thank you for watching. Special thank you to my patrons, John, Reese, Colin, Thomas, Mateus, Samuel, Matthews, and Peter. Thank you guys for supporting me, and thank you again all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.